As you can see, we are recording the webinar today. So if you're busy trying to take notes, you will be able to go back and you will be able to see what's on here. So I'm just going to ask my colleagues real quickly if I missed any announcements before we get started, before I introduce our speaker today. Okay, great. Well, we are so happy to have Carolyn Martin here with us this afternoon. Carolyn is the grants administrator for the City of Ocean Springs, but in fact, she has worn many hats within the planning department. She's done plan reviews, development applications. She's coordinated with all the internal departments. She applies for and manages all the grant activity for the city in various departments. And so she has had a wealth of experience in city government. And one of the reasons we asked Carolyn to be with us today and share is because the City of Ocean Springs, where she is located, they applied for a grant not long ago to really look at business continuity planning for all of their local businesses. And so Carolyn's going to kind of walk through with us today, sort of why you would want a business continuity plan and what her city has done to address that, how they engaged with their businesses. And then we're going to give everyone an opportunity to ask specific questions to Carolyn. And then I'm going to come back on and I'm actually going to review the template that she and the city created as a result of this project. And then we're going to make that template available to you. It's a fillable PDF at the end of our webinar today. So with that, I will turn it over to Carolyn. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're looking forward to learning from you.
My pleasure. No, welcome everyone. This is a wonderful exercise we went through, and I hope it does help. It's something that we constantly need to remind ourselves with, especially as we get closer to storm season, and it is upon us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. Is that good, Tracy? You got that?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, good. Okay, so welcome. Planning for recovery. It sounds like a pretty benign statement, but a lot of emphasis is put on planning for the emergency itself, which is vital and has to be done first. But the next step is, how are you going to come back from that quicker, more resilient, and at your best? So as Tracy said, we had done a series of small grants. So I'll back up just a little bit. First, we looked at what our sea level rise was going to be. What is our risk? As sea level rises, so does the impact of storms. So we looked at that. Then we looked at our infrastructure that would be in those areas where sea level was going to be a predicted problem, and then how to plan for that. So those were the pieces that we needed to try to put together when we started talking about continuity. And it's not just for us, it's for businesses, but it's also for the city. It's for your personal life as well. So first, what we did is we started the conversation. And well, I'm going to go back a slide. I want you guys to remember this picture of the children on the bicycle. I'm going to refer back to that location, especially if you're not familiar with the coast area. So first, we looked at what a Katrina scenario could do with sea level rise. The numbers that we were given back as we did this study was that over a 50-year period, about 1.5 feet would be the additional mean high water mark. And what does that mean for those of us who aren't into the environmental sciences? A Katrina scenario could produce as much as a 2-foot additional foot of surge. And that resonated with a lot of people because they know where the water came to during Katrina. The picture with the children on the bicycle, that was a normal high tide day. So that's what you want to look at, is on a normal high tide day that was taken about 8 years ago, add a few more feet to that on top of Katrina. So then we wanted to look at what our infrastructure, our city infrastructure, what was in the way of the sea level rise, what was going to be the most impacted, and what we needed to do. We created a committee full of city staff, county employees, and interested parties. and kind of ranked our infrastructure and what was in the most danger and also what was most important. And as you can see from the risk rating we came up with, yes, we do have water lines, wastewater lines, all that stuff needs to be protected. We had some parks, some public parks that were directly in the way. And of course, our front beach, which is our front line of defense when it comes to both sea level rise and storms. One of the locations about the middle of the chart, but one that we looked at first was Inner Harbor Park. And the three pictures that you see at the bottom there are, forget storms for a second, this was natural erosion that was happening, partially due to rising tides, partially due to runoff, and how are we going to not only protect it, but make it more resilient going forward. So we worked with our engineer, got another grant to kind of look at that infrastructure, and worked with the county to implement a living shoreline, a hybrid living shoreline, which has done nothing but grow and thrive. And that has been more resilient to date, and future storms or storms between now and then have not done the damage that they did in the past. So that's a good success mark, we believe. The next thing that we wanted to look at is how we as a city were preparing both ourselves and developers, builders, residents for proactive planning before the disaster strikes. We looked at vulnerable populations, looking for continuity in our work to make sure that we can continue to provide continuous services, and also plan new projects with resiliency in mind, making sure that any new projects or new policies had continuity and adaptation in mind. So that brings us to where we decided we really needed to evaluate our infrastructure, our operational infrastructure, to make sure that we were prepared for the next disaster to strike, because it's not a matter of if, it's always a matter of when. So you do, as the graphic shows, it's the elements of adaptation. First, you have to assess it, you have to prepare, you have to be able to respond, and you also have to adapt. So we looked at the city's operational infrastructure. We met with all the city departments. We looked at current plans, resources, and just kind of suggested improvements. And if nothing else, just having the conversation and putting all the information on the table helped to create a consolidated reference guide moving forward. So when you take that same concept and you look at your local business, it's very similar to what you would need to do for your home and your personal life, making sure you know where everything is, how you can pick up and keep going. And I'm always in for a good graphic, and trying to mop up during a flood is not the time to do it. So how can you get past that point very quickly? So what is a continuity plan? You could call it different things, but it does contain the elements of looking at not only your customers, how you can provide that service to them and come back more quickly than you might otherwise. But what do you need to do that? Your employees, your information, your data documentation, how you manage your business. Are there any improvements that can be made so that you can come back quickly? So what is it? We focused on a natural or man-made disaster, but it could be anything. We experienced this during the oil spill in 2010, during the economic downturn. We needed to look at ways to be able to continue to provide the same level of service regardless of whatever difficulty the city was facing. So from a personal perspective as well, what are your post-disaster financial losses, damages, equipment, business interruptions? And then how does it benefit a business? Well, we looked into that. We operate the city, but we talked to businesses and did some outreach to figure out what experiences that they have. And the interesting thing came back is, first, the question was, why do I need one? I have everything I need to run my business. Why do I need a continuity plan if I'm prepared for the actual disaster itself? So we did a survey, we did an outreach, and the long and short of it was there seemed to be a correlation between people who had a business interruption, especially due to a disaster, natural or otherwise, and those who had businesses that failed. The percentage seemed to nest around the same area. If they were closed for 3 months or more after a natural disaster, they typically did not come back. And that's what we wanted to look at, is to make sure that there was a mark that you could come back quickly to ensure the continued success of your business. So this was a good quote I found at the time, and it still rings true, that you need to have your list of everything handy. And I used my parents as an example following Katrina, when everything was closed, and there was a local pharmacist that knew the 10 medications that my father was on, including dosage and everything, wrote it down on a tablet and kept him going until information systems were back online. If that had not been the case, I can't imagine, what the consequences would have been for him or other people in that same situation. And we really don't think of where we could put these things where they would be safe and easily accessible. And I had one gentleman tell me, well, it's in the cloud. Well, we didn't have internet for a while, for weeks. We didn't have telephone service right away. So how can you have something in a place that you can quickly get it, quickly know what to do, and not have to think about it in a time of crisis? So Tracy mentioned the template, and this template came out of this workshop, this work that we did with our consultant. And the first thing that we realized that needed to be done was to assess the threats. What actual threats are there to your business, as far as, if you don't have utilities, the security of your records? Are they sensitive information that you need to have safe but still accessible to you and your client? Then once you know what the risks are, you may not be prone to weather interruptions. You may be fine with that, but first answering the question of what are the threats, then what are the impacts, what are the, after you determine what the threat is, exactly how is that going to impact you being able to come back online? Develop a strategy for every risk evaluation and identified threat. How can you work ahead and do what we call sunshine planning for being able to react to that? If it's vital records that are missing, or financially being able to get back online and take payment or make payments. Plan for displacement, looking at your current employee list. Who is going to be in charge? Who is going to be available? Who won't be available because of family situations? So knowing that information and knowing who has what responsibility prior to is key. So, and to test and maintain the continuity plan. So many plans that get done in the planning world and throughout life, really. You get this great plan, you put it on the shelf, and it does little but collect dust. So the key then is testing it, going through a mental exercise of responding to a threat when you're not stressed out because of the threat, and make sure that there doesn't need to be any updates. And that should be an annual event, to take it out, look at it, make sure what updates need to be made. We also at the time had our IT consultant kind of provide some guidance. And of course, this was done a few years ago, so I'm sure everything in it has changed because it's IT. But really just being able to reach out to whatever IT provider that you have and make sure that you are utilizing whatever safeguards to their fullest, as far as protecting your data, not only from failure or lack of connectivity, but also for cybercrime, for human error, for things like that that may happen in a time of stress. And unfortunately, those that may take advantage of that stress, and having something in place to make sure that all of your internet information is protected, that you are resilient physically as far as your electronic data, but also that you can keep functioning. I think they're as equal. They did just provide some information about data and recovery, which I'm not the expert on. I just do know that it's having a backup for your backup is, and my parents love it that I use them example, but they will back up their hard drive onto a external hard drive and put it in a bank deposit box. Is it overkill? I don't know. Only if you don't need it. So that was kind of an overview of the thought process. And you have to look at what is going on in the world that's making it so important to plan today. And it could be weather. It could be something in the business that you specifically deal with that may make it more important or less important. that will make it a priority, and also just to be able to look um, at how you operate your business. I've also talked to people that said, I just figured out ways to make my business operations more efficient, and that would be a bonus as well. So that's those are the slides I had, and I'll turn it back. I'll stop sharing my screen so that Tracy can pop in here. And that's just kind of the overview. And really what I would boil it down to is being prepared for how you will respond during an emergency is important, but being able to respond to how to come back from that as quickly as possible can be just as important for longevity and quality.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Sure.
I wanted to just open it up for a few minutes for questions for Carolyn. And maybe while you're thinking of your questions, I just wanted to ask you, Carolyn, how difficult was it to gain support from like the city for doing something like this? Was it, was it just immediately easy to get everybody on board? Because I know that, you had to spend some time really kind of recruiting businesses to come to the workshops and things. So I just wanted to know if you could maybe talk a little bit about that so that other folks that might be in a similar situation will know what could happen.
Right. Unfortunately, I would say we didn't get as much participation as I had hoped. We did talk to a lot of people. We didn't have great attendance at the workshop. We did have a handful of people and tried to talk to people as well. But it's very difficult to get people to talk about disaster and resiliency planning when the sun is out. And I think it was just for some people, it was a traumatic response to having gone through a disaster and emergency. And some people just think they have it better organized than they do, and maybe they do. But we did get a little, I won't say pushback, but a level of non-interest that I wasn't really ready for when we started this project. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do.
Well, thank you for that, because I think that folks need to know sometimes it's going to take some effort to get people's attention, and I know it's very difficult for folks that own their own businesses to come during business hours too. I remember that was a challenge.
Yeah, finding a time, but that's why we ultimately decided to create the template as a fillable so that it could at least be provided. So if we could get the message out and just continue to hold that messaging in, especially this time of year as the storms ramp up for the coast and the coastal areas, to at least keep that in the back of your mind, and maybe influence your day-to-day operations and make it easier. But all we could really do was make the information available and hope that people pick it up and run with it themselves.
So we do have one question in the chat. Maurice asked, is the city the one to push this information?
I wouldn't say to push the information. We talked about it in public, situations, presented it to our board so that it would be in a public setting, and tried to get the message out. Push is not really the word that I would use, but we do try to emphasize it as much as possible when we are putting information out about getting ready for storm season. So it's mostly about having people being prepared for the actual emergency. And this is more of a, unfortunately, an afterthought, but we try to kind of keep it in the same message of be prepared so that you can recover. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's something that I hope to see more just in public discussions, but it's something that the city isn't really able to, I guess, quote, push as much as just being prepared for the actual emergency itself.
And Carolyn, if I could maybe just add to that, I know kind of from a different perspective, kind of doing self-assessments with a lot of communities, it seems like when we do that, the business section of those tends to be the one that gets the lowest scores when they're doing those self-assessments. And a lot of times it's just like that awareness of what resources do our local businesses have. And I think that it feels like with this project, at least it was my observation, that now the city has a much better idea of some of the resources from those folks that actually came to the workshop. So at least have a little bit better of an understanding of what some resources they might have to bring to bear in a recovery situation. Then, and at least they know who to contact at the city. There's those
Right.
connections being made. So I know that was one thing I observed.
Yeah, and we did try to, at least in the workshops and the meetings or discussions that followed, provide the list of information. We did get, like from Tracy, I know we provided a list of regional and national emergency response resources and recovery resources. And again, just keeping that conversation going. When it's not a disaster time is what's the that's the challenge in getting people to really want to focus on it and dive into their successfully operating business. They know how to operate it. Don't tell me how to operate it. And I get that. But do you know who's available to be the first one to come open it up when physically accessible? Questions like that. I don't know if I could do it for my daily life. It's something that we just probably need to think of on a daily level and then apply it to businesses. But I think our role has been just to try to get the messaging out there and encourage people to be resilient so that we can, help yourself so that you can help your clients and your employees.
We do have another question in the chat. And said, thanks for the presentation. Do you mind sharing the workshop material and your outcomes, good and bad?
Yeah, Tracy has all the workshop materials, and I'll get with her and make sure she's got a good comprehensive set of what we've done. It's been a few years. I really do want to try to bring the messaging up again. It's been a while since we really pushed the resiliency and recovery aspect. We've been focused on, getting through the emergency. But yes, we do have some information that was provided that we can provide.
And then another question, can too much information run people to panic?
That is a good question. It's always a balance of thinking through things thoroughly and getting overwhelmed with the possibilities. And I think at the time, a lot of people's panic was triggered. They didn't want to think about those things. So that's why we try to not be too forceful about it, but just to remind people that they do need to think ahead and plan ahead, because you will push people out of the way that just don't want to think about it.
And another question, are new businesses completing the business continuity template? Do you track it?
We don't track it. Partially just a capacity issue on our end. It's unfortunately something we don't really have the capacity to make a priority. But we did want to at least get that conversation going, and the information is available. I haven't followed up with the businesses that did receive it, but we have provided it to businesses as a template moving forward and made ourselves available for any questions. But again, I think it's about time for another push. I think we've, as a public, have gotten a little complacent with it, and with the projected storm season, it would be good to bring up in public again and remind people that it's not always easy to come back.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolyn. If you can stay with us in case folks think of other questions, if you have that time, that would be awesome. So if you still have some additional questions for Carolyn, please put them in the chat box, and we're going to kind of move on to the introduction of the template at this time and share what that's like, since Carolyn's already talked a little bit about it. And so I'm going to share my screen if you'll give me just 1 second to get that up here. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this. Okay. All right, great. So what I'm going to do is, so when we do the follow-up for the webinar, we'll send you Carolyn's presentation with her permission, but then we'll also send you the template that they created. And then that way you'll have it and you can go in and share it with others that you think might be interested as well. So what I'm going to do is just a quick overview about what's in that template and why it's in there. And then I'll bring up the online, I'll share my screen and show you how easy it is to fill it out. So these are the sections that you can find in the template. There's a brief introduction, and actually most of the introduction, what's so nice about this is that if you don't have anything down on paper, then the template already gets you started in a really good way. And so the introduction just talks about the objectives and the scope, a lot of what Carolyn just mentioned, like why you would want a business continuity plan and who's responsible for it. Then there's a section on the maintenance of the plan, how often you decide that it needs to be updated. There is a whole section on insurance that you answer some yes or no questions about for business interruption, just specifically, and kind of what your plans are for that and what your insurance coverage covers. Then there's a critical business function table in here, and we're going to kind of go through what that looks like and what it means to fill it out. Then there is a plan activation and communication. So there's a whole lot of things that would happen before you would put a business continuity plan into play, but this is kind of telling you what happens, what are those steps, and how do you know when to activate it. And then finally, there's a little section at the end called the family emergency plan. And what that does is it gives you an opportunity, especially if you maybe have several employees, to give them some resources so that they can be preparing at home, because that will obviously also be interrupted during a disaster. So these are the main sections that are in the template. But before you get to that introduction, there's going to be a place in here for you to put any kind of change and reviews and the dates that you do that, just like with any other plan. And so the first time you fill this out, this will probably be blank, but then the idea is that you can keep the same document and that you can just revisit it at least once a year. But if you decide it needs to be revisited more than that, you can do that. Typically with most continuity plans, you're at least revisiting these on a yearly basis, hopefully prior to storm season. Then there's also an immediate action checklist before you get to the introduction. So what this does is, if you remember, if you're in a disaster situation, even though sometimes you know how to respond, you might forget like what all needs to be done. And so this is just a very quick, first glance at, hey, these are the things. First, get everyone safe, make sure everyone is in a safe location, evacuate the building if necessary, if it's during work hours and you have people there. And so it's telling you all these things to make sure you've done before you actually even start to implement the continuity plan, just as a reminder. And then you get into the first part of the template. And what I really like about how Ocean Springs decided to do this is that all of these little blue areas that you see on here, they immediately fill out for you as soon as you place your business name in there. So let's just say you're Ace Hardware Store. So if you fill out on the very front page, Ace Hardware Store, it's going to autofill that in a lot of these places for you. Now, you still need to go through and you need to read it with whatever team is going to be your emergency response team, but at least it helps you not have to start at ground zero, and you kind of know the parts of the plan that should be in here. So that's in the introduction. And it just talks about, for those folks on your team that may not understand the importance of this, what the objectives are and what the scope of the plan is. Then you move into the next section, which is the changes to the plan or the maintenance responsibility. This is where you're starting to identify, okay, who do I have on my team that's going to be responsible for activating this plan in the event of a disaster? And this is where I always brings to mind how we cross-train our employees and what that looks like. Because even though you'll see like these little blank spaces, it might say maintenance of the Ace Hardware business continuity plan is the joint responsibility of Ace Hardware management, the facilities management director, and the business continuity coordinator. Well, if you're a small business, you may not, that may be one person that has all of those roles, right? But this gives you an opportunity, regardless of how large your business is, to think about those roles and who is responsible for those things. And it also, if you're going to give a copy of this to your employees, would also help them to understand who's in charge of doing those things. The next section is insurance, and this one you will have to go through question by question. And if you'll notice, like on this one, it says, is your place of business in a FEMA designated flood zone? This is something that you can talk to with your certified floodplain manager that's within your city or within your county. And if you're not sure where you are, you can actually contact that office. So in this template, you'll see it has the Ocean Springs address and telephone number for the city. So you can actually change that in the template If you live over in, D'Iberville, or if you live in Mobile, then obviously this is not going to be the number that you call for your FEMA designated floodplain, although I bet those people can help you. But you would want to talk to your certified floodplain manager within your city. And if you are a CFM attending the webinar, this is something that that you might want to think about as needing to be provided to local businesses. A lot of times they may not know. They might know it for their home, but they may or may not know it for their business. And then there's another series of questions that really just gets at, hey, if you have if you have flood insurance, like for instance, through the National Flood Insurance Program, that doesn't really cover business interruption. And so if that doesn't cover business interruption and you're going to need that kind of coverage, then there's a series of questions that talks about, okay, well, what kinds of interruption, service interruption is, different, for instance, than like civil authority interruption. Do you have coverage for these things? And what does that look like? So if, for instance, you go through and you're answering no to some of these things, then it's a really good opportunity for you to say, okay, I probably need to sit down with my insurance agent or my broker, and I need to ask some of these questions and make sure I really understand what our coverage is going to be, so that then if there is a disaster and we're trying to come back from that, I know how I'm covered, how my employees are covered, et cetera. So all of this is covered in that section, but I'm not going to go through all the questions. I just want to let you know there is a section for that. The next big section is the hazard identification and risk assessment. If you go to any major corporation and any major city, for that instance, for that matter, and you look at their hazard mitigation plan, you're going to find a whole section on hazard identification and risk assessment. So what I would suggest with this part, with your business, you'll see all the hazards here that are listed on the left. I would make sure that I'm using, like, if my city has resources for these and has already identified them, if maybe my county emergency management or even my state emergency management, most of those places are already going to have done this for you, because your business is going to be located in an area that they've already done a risk assessment for. So for you, you might feel like flooding is a low priority, but if you go and look at the floodplain maps and you find out that you're in a special flood hazard area, or you find out that your city and their hazard mitigation plan has designated your area as a high risk, then you might need to rethink that priority. So I always would encourage folks, if you're filling this out, to be sure that you have additional resources to help you with the hazard identification piece, because chances are definitely this information is going to be available to you. If for some reason you're having a hard time with this section, this is another time where you could reach out to any of us that are on the Sea Grant Extension team, and we can point you in the right direction, because for most municipalities, many of us have worked on those hazard mitigation plans. I'm actually doing one for the University of Southern Mississippi right now, and we have done this for all of our campus locations. And so you'll find that you don't need to have to do that on your own. There's going to be people that can help. And there's several pages of this. There's even places that are maybe a hazard that you identify for your business that's not on this screen. Like I know, for instance, one of the businesses I talked with in Gulf Shores, Alabama, they considered a hazard, not a natural hazard, but like if, for instance, they could not get to their laundry facilities when it was high season, high tourist season, and they needed to launder things for, I don't know, 300 or 400 properties, then that was considered a hazard for them because they couldn't operate their business without that laundry service. And so they actually thought through what they would do in that situation. So you might find that there is something different that needs to go on here. And you can either put that here and note it, or you can put it in the business functions section. So speaking of critical business functions, there's a whole section that allows you to go through and complete what those functions are for your particular business. So let me just give you an example here. Let's just say for this particular table, under function, you're supposed to enter the function that may need to be resumed. So for like most every business, that's one of them might be payroll. So let's just payroll services. People are still going to need to be paid even after a disaster. So then you go and you think about the criticality, and there's a whole series of questions in the template that says, okay, well, how often does this function occur, and how many departments perform this function? And are there other functions that are dependent upon the successful completion of this, for instance? That helps you to start thinking about the criticality so that then you can rank it here, low, medium, or high, depending upon your business. And then the maximum downtime. Again, it's the amount of time your business could afford for the function to be down before it's going to cause, harm to your business. And then, of course, the role, like what team players, what employees might be part of getting that function back online. And then the required resources for that. So here, maybe something to start thinking about, which is also mentioned later in the template, is, okay, if I know I have to get payroll back in place, then where is that function going to take place? And there's a place later in the template to put that. So for instance, I had done an assessment with Myers Real Estate that owns a lot of the condominiums and rental properties in coastal Alabama and Gulf Shores. And they actually have a separate site that they move employees to in order to perform that payroll function. And so they have an offsite that's out of the special flood hazard area, is far enough away from the areas that would potentially be impacted. And then they function at another site entirely. So then they have to start thinking about, what team members would go to that site. They have to start thinking about what equipment that they would need at that site. So this critical business function section and the location of like an alternative site are all part of this template. So the plan activation is really just trying to get you to think through, if you kind of read through this text, when is the plan activated during business hours and by whom? And then if it's after business hours, what does that look like? And how is that different for the activation? And that might look very different, right? And so there's a tables here that you can fill out about how you're going to communicate with employees in both of those situations. Then we get to, okay, how are we going to resume operations? Because this is a continuity plan. So how are we going to resume operations as quickly as possible? And this is where you have an opportunity to sit with your team, however many people that might be, or you might be a team of one. But whatever that might be, at least gives you an opportunity to write down, put in writing in one spot, where is this going to occur? Is it going to be on site? We're kind of assuming here that your site location is not operable. So where else are these activities going to occur in order to get back online and functioning? Who's the contact for that? Who's an alternative person, a backup person in case maybe that person can't be reached? So that's where you're going to start working on your strategies. And then you may already have some of these next tables in a different format, which is great. You could just add them to at the end of the template if you wanted to, or add them, in as long as you got all the stuff in the same place. But a current site asset inventory is super important. The number of people, offsite storage locations, any kind of information about what's there. Larger corporations usually do this with inventory numbers, and those inventories get checked all the time. If you're a smaller business, you might be doing the inventory yourself. And so making sure that there's an asset inventory is super important, especially if you're going to seek any kind of damages and funding for your business after the fact. There's also a lot of templates in here for your communication throughout your activation of your business continuity plan. And there's ones for employees, but there's also ones for vendors, because remember, those folks have to be contacted as well. And then here's the end where I was showing you that the family plan in here, and where you can point people. There's a lot of different resources for your employees to figure this out. So that's a really quick rundown of everything that's in the business continuity plan template, and we're going to send that to you. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to go to the fillable template just so that I can quickly show you how easy it is to get started with this, so that then in just a matter of minutes, you can at least kind of get something started if you don't have anything on paper already. So let me stop sharing the screen and let me show the actual template. And then this way, you can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is the template. And let's just do what I did earlier. And I said Ace Hardware Store. I mean, I'm just picking anything. It could be whatever your business name is. And then I go down here, and today is what, the 17th of 2024. And so I've already started. I've got something on paper already. Okay. And here are all those places where you would make document changes. This is the first time I'm completing this, so I don't need to do this part yet because I haven't modified anything. Here's my internal checklist that we talked about. And then if I go straight into the introduction, notice how nicely it fills out all these areas for me. And so at least if I have nothing else on paper, this is really helping me to get started and know which sections to go in there. And it's like this throughout. And then all of these pieces are filled out for you. But then when you start to get to the insurance section, so give me just a second to get, to the yes or no questions, then you have an opportunity to just click these buttons. And these are all boxes that you can fill out on your own. So it's I think it's very user friendly. And if you want to go in and change those pieces in the fillable PDF, you're able to do that. So I will, just for time purposes, I'll kind of stop sharing my screen for this right now and just see if we had any questions about why you might want to use a template and like maybe where you might want to get resources. I see one of the things that Carolyn mentioned, and she's exactly right, that there's a lot of information that your employees probably need to know that is located within the business continuity plan, especially if there's a flood. It might impact their ability to get to work, for instance, or their ability to have a daycare for their children, so they may not be able to come to work. So, thank you for that, for reminding me of that, Carolyn. And then I see that Marianne has asked if other communities have adopted it. So we're hoping that other communities will utilize it. That's one of the purposes of making it available to folks today. Carolyn, they had such a, they had a lot of success in trying to get their businesses there and getting businesses to start that. But as she mentioned, there's been not as much capacity for people to be able to do that. And what we've heard from doing other assessments from local businesses is that they don't have the capacity to go through and do a written business plan, even much less a business continuity plan. And so our hope is that by being able to share this more broadly, that there will be some other communities that are able to use that. And did you have any?
I'll just to cap off with that. I mean, yes, we made this template as generic as possible so that it could be shared. It came from a group effort, and more than happy to share it with anyone. So if you want to pass it along, it's more than available. And hopefully we'll get that conversation kind of geared up again around here as well. But the more people are prepared, the better we all come back after any sort of incident. So happy to share.
And I see Maurice's question about, do you give this to businesses? If you're a local government, I would say absolutely. It would be great to share this with your local businesses, especially the smaller ones that may not have that capacity. And so then what you would do is you would share that with them in the hopes that then if they filled that out, they can maybe share back and forth information. So like if you have a hazard mitigation plan that, includes needing resources that are staged in certain parts of your community. Well, maybe if they've completed this business continuity plan, you know better who's going to be able to be back up and online, and who might need a reentry pass to come back in because they can provide a critical service. And so it helps, I think, to start that conversation between your local businesses in the city, and some of which you may have before, but I think you'll be real surprised to find out how many of your smaller businesses may not have the capacity to hire someone to do a big plan for them. So this is a way for those lower capacity businesses to be able to start something and to start sharing that information back and forth with you.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize start. It's a start. It's not meant to be totally comprehensive for everyone, but it will at least get your mind thinking in the areas that you maybe haven't really explored before, and that's what it's designed to do.
So we still have a few more minutes. I know we weren't sure how long the running time would be for this. And so, but we still have a few minutes that we can see if we can answer any questions for you. I don't know if we might have some business owners online that might be able to tell us, like, feel free to share in the chat box if you already have a written business plan, and if that includes business continuity and things about, business interruption insurance, those kinds of things. We would love to know about that as well. And then while you're thinking of that, I have another question just for all of our participants about if there are other topics related to business continuity planning that you're really interested to see. So for instance, like, if you're interested in something that is more like focused on cross training and, what are some best practices for cross training for your employees, or if you're more interested in, like these emergency operation centers that some folks set up outside of their normal business location. So we'd really like to know if there are other topics that are of interest to you, because then we can dive deeper into more specifics. We really wanted to start with this one to give you an introduction to business continuity planning and kind of some template that could be used for your local businesses. So Kiama has placed the link to that in the chat box. And what I'll do is I will share my screen and see if there's anyone that wants to start adding things to this particular template. So you'll have to go to the link that Kiama provided in order to be able to add something to this Padlet. Because when I share my screen, you'll be able to see what other people put, but I have a tendency to want to click on the screen that I'm viewing, and you won't be able to do that. You'll have to actually pull it up as a separate link. So let me just share my screen. This is what the Padlet looks like. This is what it should look like when you get to that.
And Tracy, would you mind showing everyone who's not familiar with Padlet how they would add a topic to it, please?
Absolutely. So hopefully you can see my cursor. I'm going to go down here to the bottom right, and I'm going to click on the plus symbol. And when it comes up, I'm going to be able to just write whatever I want to right here. So like I might say, I want to learn about cross training. So I just type that in there where the question is, and then I push publish. And now that comment is listed here. And if you say, oh, I think that's a good idea too, then you can go and comment. You can add your comment, like, I would like to see this as well. And then you can add your comment to that, or you can start a new comment. So hopefully that's straightforward. So if you have other topics or maybe concerns, especially if you are a local business owner, and maybe it has to do with, well, how do I find out what my insurance policies are for my business, or how do I know if I'm located in a FEMA flood hazard zone, or whatever those other topics might be. We're all open to that, so that then we could provide additional resources on those topics. So I'll pause here and just let folks take a few minutes, and then see if you also have any additional questions for us. I should have also mentioned that if the Padlet is too cumbersome, feel free to just put your comments in the chat box. Okay, I don't see anybody that's typing, so, and that's fine. There might not be any additional topics. If you think of things that you would like more information on, if you would let us know. You can expect an email that's going to come from Kiama, and that email will have the business template that we talked about today, Carolyn's presentation. I can include my presentation there as well, and then any other resources from today's webinar. So we're happy to send all that stuff out to you, and you're free and welcome to share that with others that you think might be interested, especially local businesses in your area. Please don't forget, if you are looking for professional development credits, to put your to let us know that in the chat box with your name and your contact information, so that we can be sure and get those certificates for you for today. And with that, I'll just do one last call for questions. Oh, and Kiama's reminded me, we do have an evaluation. We would love for you to fill that out for today's webinar. And so she's put the link for that down there. So I'll stay on for a few more minutes. I'll ask Carolyn if she doesn't mind staying on for a few more minutes. But this concludes our presentation for the webinar, and we sure do thank you for being here. We'll stay on for a few additional minutes to answer any questions. Thank you, Stephen, for putting the APA entry also in the chat box for those credits. Appreciate that. And thank you for the comments here on the Padlet about resources to assist businesses with their vulnerabilities and hazards. Thank you for that.